hasn't allowed press to visit the area, and the details that we are getting are trickling from sources in the Indian Army.
The army has been giving some information confirming that the episode did take place, but in terms of a statement from the External Affairs Ministry, that's not taken place so far.
The internet in the area has been shut down, and there's barely any communication available to the people living in the area, and that's been a problem for the journalists as well. So we have to rely on sources on the Indian side, as well as whatever we are hearing from the Chinese side in their state media. But we know way more from the Indian side because of the press freedom in India versus China.
This conflict goes back more than a century, but it hasn't claimed lives since 1975. The so-called line of actual control separating China from India is the world's longest disputed border. The question of who controls what territory elicits different responses depending on who and when you ask, or whether you're in Beijing or Delhi. Only one national leader has been heard from on this confrontation, India's Narendra Modi. Citizens accustomed to the Prime Minister flexing his nationalist muscles on issues like this got something a little different.
What we have is a Prime Minister who calls an all-party meet and ends it with the statement that there has been no skirmish and nobody's crossed the border and there's nobody on our side.
न वहां कोई हमारी सीमा में घुस आया है। लद्दाख में हमारे 20 जाबाज शहीद हुए, लेकिन जिन्होंने भारत माता की तरफ आंख उठाकर देखा था, उन्हें वो सबक सिखा कर गए।
We are talking about dead soldiers. There are bodies in bags. He was trying to say, okay, this is over. If I don't admit it, I don't have to explain it. I don't have to be accountable for it. But statements by the Indian Prime Minister do not remain confined to the contexts in which they are made, especially when they are televised.
राष्ट्रीय सुरक्षा के लिए जो भी जरूरी कार्य है.
The inadvertent effect of that statement was that the Chinese side ended up with the conclusion that the Indian side is admitting indeed that the Chinese PLA had never entered Indian territory, and that was used as an evidence to make an argument it's the Indian side that's the aggressor.
The Chinese seized his video, put subtitles in it, and released it to their audiences and to the world on social media platforms. It was almost as though he was speaking the script written for him by the Chinese government. But if India releases all the gruesome details, it might incite people to demand sterner action from the Indian government, which could potentially escalate into a war. So the Indian side is wary for that reason.
The Modi video that circulated on Chinese social media was put there and helpfully subtitled by the Communist Party's youth wing. The more traditional news outlets Beijing controls have been almost invisible on this story. The Indian media are China's polar and ideological opposites. In India, the market rules. There are more than 450 24-hour TV news channels there, almost all of them privately owned and ratings-driven. They set the global benchmark for collective bellicosity on the airwaves. Contrast that with the Chinese media, which have yet to report the casualty figures, even official ones.
For the Chinese government, the most important thing is to make sure that they control the narrative and they do not allow anybody to say anything which might potentially complicate the situation and embarrass them. The Chinese do not want the border incidents to escalate unwittingly of a reporting on the graphic details of the border incident might well stimulate very strong nationalistic outbursts in China, which would not be in the interest of the Communist Party.
On the other hand, Hindu nationalists are a core part of Narendra Modi's constituents. He is not above flirting with radical elements on social media if it keeps them in his camp. But the Prime Minister knows this is not the time to fly the flag or talk tough with China, that India is outgunned in this dispute, militarily and economically. The last time the two sides came to blows, 45 years ago, their economies were relative equals. China's has since grown into the world's second largest. It's now 5 times the size of India's. and the subcontinent is reliant on all kinds of Chinese products, right down to the phones and televisions Indians use to get their news. A fact that somehow eluded Indian talking heads, who have been urging their viewers to launch a border dispute boycott of Chinese brands.
मैं हूं सैनिक इसलिए क्योंकि मैं अपने पॉकेट से चीन का बायकॉट करूंगा। मैं सेना हमारी बुलेट से लड़ेगी, लेकिन हमारे बटुए से हमको लड़ना पड़ेगा और चीनी अर्थव्यवस्था की कमर तोड़नी पड़ेगी।
There has been these TV anchors from Times Now and Republic TV promoting this hashtag to stop buying these Chinese products. But the irony is that some of these TV channels are sponsored by Chinese companies themselves, like Vivo and Care. So you are promoting this narrative, but then at the same time, you're taking money from these Chinese companies.
One screenshot of a show like that it just makes such a mockery of the kind of message that they're trying to give out. On my social media feed, there was a still image of a child throwing a very cheap toy into a dustbin. It was made in China, apparently. Clearly, all this is being filmed by a smartphone. And the still image has got the watermark of the phone, and that's a Chinese-made phone. Instead of focusing on the kind of dignified retaliation that a country like India should be coming back with, and you're allowing your people and your media to actually dumb down the discourse in this vile manner.
Meanwhile, the comparative silence of the Chinese news media is the sound of censors quietly going about their work. You've got to read between the red lines. Round one in this media battle goes to Presidents Xi Jinping and China, and he hasn't said a thing. Narendra Modi should take note, but that's never been his style.
The damage to India is monumental, and he should go on television and try to undo that damage. There was a cartoon published in an Indian newspaper the day after